It was nearing Christmas of 2021, and by that I mean that it was mid-November. I live in the US, so Christmas and holiday items tend to go up in October. Being that I was at the time 16, and I always try to get my shopping done early because a lot of my gifts were handmade. Some background: there are a lot of shops, small grocery stores, as well as the local Uptown within walking distance of my house. It was at the Uptown where this had occurred. One of my brothers, Anthony, was really into music and learning different instruments, so I decided to go to the specific store in the Uptown that sold music supplies. Because of my schedule, I wasn't able to go until after 4 p.m., which was when the sun had started to set. In hindsight, I shouldn't have tried to go, but I was desperate enough to finish my gift shopping by the first week of December. I stopped at our local Dollar General to get some paint that I ran out of, and then crossed the street to the Uptown for Anthony's music supplies. While crossing the street, I saw a large brown truck stopped at the intersection. I hadn't seen a truck of that color in tow or ever before, so it was pretty noticeable. I also noticed that I was turning into the Uptown parking lot, the same as me. One thing about our Uptown is that the majority of it is bars and restaurants, so there were quite a lot of people mingling about some of the bars. It did make me a bit nervous, but the music store was closed, so I just decided to tough it out. As I was entering the store, the brown truck slowly crept up on me. I was kind of spooked, but figured whoever was just being careful of the people. The store didn't end up having what I needed, so I placed an order for the following weekend. I left the shop. By now, it was well into dusk. As soon as I had left, I saw the truck parked right outside of the store. I brushed it off as if they had just gone to the store next to me, and I went to leave. But as soon as I turned my back, I saw the lights of the truck go on and the engine roared to life. I basically peed myself right there. I turned to look at who was in the car, but the windows were so heavily tinted that I don't know how they were able to see it. The car pulls out and slowly creeps towards me, and I'm paralyzed. I figured that I was going to be kidnapped and murdered right then and there. I found my nerve to run when the car was only 6 feet away, and I booked it down the sidewalk. The car started to go faster to match pace with me, and the people from the bars didn't seem to notice or care. I was crying at this point, and I didn't know what to do. That's when I saw my saving grace. I saw two ladies a little younger than my mom outside a coffee shop that was closing. They spotted me and took a chance, and I ran up to them and told them the situation. The pink shirt coffee lady had to leave but gave the key to the lady in the blue shirt, who offered to let me stay inside the cafe until my mom could come and get me. The brown truck drove past a few times, but then gave up and left the way that it came in. My mom showed up minutes later, and I thanked the blue coffee lady for her help, and I still go to their shop regularly. So, I was around 15 or 16 at the time, and my mom, dad, and I were on a family trip to New York City. It was a really good trip at first. We visited the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, Times Square, and etc. And for the most part, it was a normal vacation. But towards the end of our trip was when everything went to crap. It was our last day there, and we were trying to get back to the airport, so we decided to take an Uber. A couple minutes pass, and a gray Civic pulls up to the sidewalk that we were on. I remember noticing that he had Lyft and Uber stickers on his car in multiple places, almost excessively. It kind of felt like he was trying to prove that he was our Uber. It was just a small thing, but looking back, I really wish that I took more concern about how sus this guy was. Moving on, we were running late, so I'm guessing my dad didn't really pay attention to the license plate, because this guy was definitely not an Uber driver. He was a lanky man wearing clothes akin to rags and looked like he was drugged out by the time, but nothing seemed off to us. Again, we were running late, and what happened was the least of our expectations. The ride was normal until we got to the airport. We all expected him to get off at the highway and let us off, but he didn't. Instead, he casually continued down the highway past where we wanted to be dropped off at. This was when my dad noticed that the man didn't have a meter or his phone set up with the Uber GPS open. We were starting to get worried and my dad asked him in a stern voice, "Excuse me, where's your meter?" The man stayed silent, flustered, so he asked once more, this time yelling, "Where's your meter?" Again, no reply, but at this point the man started dashing down the highway, weaving past other cars and just driving very dangerously. We were all panicking. My dad was screaming at him to let us off. My mother was crying and praying with her rosary clutched firmly in her fist, and I was in shock. I froze up. I couldn't even cry or scream as much as I so desperately wanted to. I was completely immobilized. This continued for a while, driving down an unfamiliar road to God knows where, with the car only getting faster and faster. I started having those classic end-of-the-road type thoughts like, holy crap, this might be it and there's nothing that I can do about it. But luckily, we were saved. I don't know if we passed by it or if someone in a car we passed had called the cops, but we soon heard sirens blaring behind us, and we were being tailed at high speed by multiple police cars. One of the cops had a megaphone or something to amplify their voice, and screamed out for the man to pull over. Obviously, he put up a fight and the police had to actually cut him off for him to finally stop. The police helped us out of the car and got all of our things from the trunk while putting blankets around us and telling us that it was gonna be okay and that we were safe. At this moment, I felt the biggest wave of relief wash over me that I had ever felt in my life. Don't get me wrong, it still messed with me and my family apart, and I was still left pretty traumatized, but I was at least glad that me and my family were alive and safe. The police gave us a ride back to the airport and everything went as planned from that point on. But holy crap, am I glad that I never had to find out where this guy was taking us and what he was planning to do with us. Just thinking about it gives me the goosebumps. I guess the moral of the story is to always check the license plate before going in an Uber or a Lyft. That feature on the app that tells you what it is exists for a good reason. I got off at work at around 11 p.m. The sad part about this is I volunteered to work this shift. If I had never offered, I would have never experienced this. This particular apartment is on my college campus. My campus is an open campus, which means that anyone could enter at any time. As a female, I guess that's pretty unnerving. However, I always carried a pocket knife and pepper spray. I had to park pretty far away from my apartment since most parking spots were filled. I finally found a parking spot, but thank God I checked my surroundings before I got out. There was a fairly tall, grimy old man standing about 50 feet away from me. This sent a chill down my spine because he stood so still that he looked like a mannequin. I could see his bloodshot eyes, they were wide open. Now I knew that I wasn't getting out of the car, but what the man yelled to me made my heart pound out of my chest. "Come here, pretty girl," he said with a slight, creepy grin on his face. I don't know why I did it, but I shot the bird at him, probably because I had a feeling that he was a pervert or something. I put my car in reverse and I backed out of the parking spot, keeping my eyes on the man. My heart pounded even harder when he started speed walking towards me. He was about 10 feet away from my car when I finally put my car in drive and stomped on the gas pedal. I literally drove to the other side of the apartments and I panicked. I called my roommate and best friend and told her what had just happened. I asked her to wait for me at the door and to stay on the phone with me. I stayed in my car for about 5 minutes to calm myself down. I kept looking around to see if the guy followed me. He was nowhere to be seen. I didn't want to get out of my car, however, I had to get in my apartment somehow. I parked in a spot where my apartment wasn't too far away anymore. I decided to book it towards my room. I had my best friend on FaceTime the entire time that I sprinted. I flew down 2 flights of stairs until finally I was about 100 feet away from my door. I saw my best friend waving at me, a feeling of relief washing over me just for a few seconds. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Get Out, but just picture a grown man sprinting towards you. That's what happened. The grimy old man hauled towards me, but this time he looked upset. It was like a scene straight out of a horror movie. I don't know how he found me, and I don't know what his problem was, but I could have broke the national record for the 40-meter dash. I darted towards my door. Thankfully, I made my apartment just in time. Right when my best friend and I slammed the door, the man's fingers got caught on the crack. He screamed and tried to shove the door open, but my best friend and I surprisingly had shut him out. That happened about a year ago. My best friend and I never spoke on it, ever. I never saw the man again. I never volunteered to work another night shift. I never worked another night shift, period. And I never ever shot a bird at anyone else. What I'm going to say happened 2 years ago. I was only 10. I'm not an English native speaker, so feel free to correct me if I'm making any mistakes. Even my parents don't know about what happened. But hanging here and reading other people's stories made me feel the urge to share mine as well. For the context, my father, mother, and little sister and me were in China, in a very luxurious hostel organized like that. The entrance is a building itself from which you had to take an elevator to access a big park. From this park, you have to walk 3 to 4 minutes to arrive in front of a 30-floor building. It's designed to contain one really big suite per floor. So when taking a lift, you scan your card, and it will automatically bring you to the floor associated with it. So, on the 3rd day of our trip, my parents decided to go on a date together, leaving me and my sister alone in the suite. And they left some cash so we could order some takeaway food. So, I ordered some noodles and I waited. And when somebody finally called to say that it was all good, I went to search for the food. And that's when I made my first big mistake. I didn't close the front door, thinking nobody could come here and I wouldn't be able to open it since I would have a lot of things in my hands. So, I called the lift and I waited, way too long. When I was finally here, somebody was in it. I politely said hello, but he didn't answer. He was wearing a red sweatshirt and had Adidas joggers. I pushed the 0 button and the man headed out. The doors closed when I finally realized my second big mistake. Why the heck did he go out? He shouldn't, since there wasn't any other room except for my family's. That's when I started to panic. I tried to stop the lift, but it wouldn't. So, as soon as I arrived at the ground floor, I went back up to our floor. The front door was wide open, and the absence of noise made me feel uncomfortable, assuming that either my sister had been caught or she was hiding. I went for the second option because the man was taller than me, which meant that his footsteps must have been heavier than mine on the ground, and I believed in my sister's intelligence to figure that out. I finally found her hiding behind one of the sofas crying. She told me that the man was searching in the luggage for valuable items. We played hide and seek with him. The room was real big. For almost 30 minutes, and I finally went in my room. I noticed that my Nintendo Switch had vanished on the way, and I called the reception to send some security guys to arrest the man. Everything went pretty smoothly, and the man turned out to be the son of somebody staying here, which made sense why he had access. One really creepy thing was that he had a knife on his way from the kitchen of our suite, showing that he didn't just want to take some of our stuff, but he had other things in mind. A couple years ago, I used to attend a boarding school in Singapore. This was for the last 2 years of high school, or junior college as we called it. I'm a Catholic, and since none of my friends in the boarding school were practicing Catholics, I attended Sunday Mass on my own every week. If you've been to Singapore, you know it's one of the best countries to go around on your own. It's sometimes even more fun than going around with other people. So this wasn't something that bothered me too much. This Sunday in question came before a long week of submissions and tests, so I was already stressed to begin with. On top of that, I had also somehow managed to oversleep. I liked attending the 8 a.m. Mass. It's the one with the best choir. So I had to splurge on a cab instead of taking the bus like I usually do. I only got a limited amount of money for the month from my parents, and I spent most of it on food. So by the time I had walked into church, I was upset and just looking for some peace. I guess the stress made me look frazzled and upset, which might have been what caught his attention. As I was late for mass, I had to stand at the back of the church with the other latecomers, as there were no open seats left for us. This man was standing a few feet to my right. He was wearing spectacles and an eternal frown. He was Chinese, like almost everyone else in the church. I noticed him scowling at me throughout the mass, but I ignored him on purpose because I didn't want to get upset unnecessarily. I was the only Indian in my boarding school, so I was used to receiving weird looks. It didn't help that the area in which my school and also this church were located was a pretty rich neighborhood, and I had never seen an obviously non-Chinese person in the church. So the too long don't read is I was used to be a stared at minority. I refused to pay this guy any attention though. What happened next took place during a lull in the mass, during the distribution of communion. Many people tend to move out of the church after receiving communion, so a seat opened up near where I and the man were standing. I moved towards the tent after making sure there were no elderly around me who would like the seat. I sat there. The man maneuvered himself so that he was now standing behind me. This was when I began to feel unsafe. And then he began talking. His words were not directly towards anyone in particular. He seemed to be there on his own. The silence in the church only served to amplify what he was saying. Only in our section though, he wasn't speaking that loud. Basically, apropos of nothing, this random guy began railing about how the Indians were destroying his beautiful country. He went on about how they were doing horrible things to themselves on the streets of Geylang, staking up their schools and hospitals, and making Singapore into a jungle. How the government needed to throw all of them out. He said a bunch of other things that I don't remember now. He also repeated a lot of the stuff, which is why it got stuck in my head. He must have said stuff like that 5 times, and maybe even switched it out for other horrible things. It was obvious that his words were meant for me. I turned around to look at him when he first began with a kind of, "Are you kidding me" face. He was staring at me, his face the stock image of hatred and rage. The people around him were shifting uncomfortably. I turned back around, shut my eyes, and willed him quiet. He didn't shut up. At some point, I began quietly crying. I wanted so badly to move away, to run out of the church, but I was scared of causing a scene and making people notice me in a way that I didn't want to be noticed. I cannot fully explain the absurdity of the situation. We were in a church. In some other section, the priest was still distributing communion to the congregation. The rest of the church sat in prayerful silence. And in the back, in this one corner, this random guy was spewing hate directed at a 17-year-old. And nobody said a word to shut him up. When the priest returned to the altar and had us rise for the final blessing, I took that opportunity to get out of my pew and move away from the man. But to my horror, he followed. The mass had ended by then, and people were moving towards the exit, as was I. But he followed behind me, raised his voice, asked me where I was going. That was when a lady in the vicinity said something like, "Don't say that to her, don't use those words." But when I looked to her, thinking that she would help me get away from this guy, she refused to meet my eye and moved away. We got out of the church, and I couldn't see the guy anymore, so I ran blindly towards the exit and in the direction of the bus stop. I couldn't think straight, didn't know what I looked like. I had no clue what was happening. I got to the bus stop and decided to get onto the first bus that pulled up, even if it was going the wrong way. I thought that I was safe, and I got my phone out of my purse. And then I turned around and, like a horror movie, He was there, walking towards me. The only other people at the bus stop were a woman and a kid. I didn't feel confident enough to approach them and ask for help, so, fingers shaking, I locked my phone and called my roommate. She answered the phone groggily. I had probably woken her up, and without waiting for her to say anything, I told her very loudly that a strange man had followed me from the church to the bus stop, and he had been verbally abusing me, and I didn't feel safe. The man, who had been advancing towards me all this time, went and stood with the woman and the child, who had also heard me, and moved away from him. The bus pulled up, I got in, the doors closed, and we pulled away. In that moment, I was so overwhelmed by what had happened that I stood at the entrance of the bus, next to the bus driver, and just burst out crying. I don't remember what was going through my head. My heart was going crazy in my chest. I must have been having the worst panic attack. The bus driver and everyone else in the bus was staring at me like I was crazy probably. At the next stop, the driver asked me if I was okay, and when I couldn't respond, asked me where I needed to go. I gave him the name of my school. A passenger who had just gotten into the bus took me back out, explained to me which bus I would need to take, and asked someone also waiting at the bus stop to make sure that I caught the right bus. Somehow, I got back to the boarding school. I had left my roommate on call, and it had made her extremely worried. By the time I got back to my room, she had notified our mentor and had placed a call to the church to ask if I was still there and if they could find me. They obviously didn't know anything. So, I guess that's my story. I just want to clarify that besides this one experience, I have never felt unsafe in Singapore. And I'm not in any way trying to post that all Singaporeans are bad towards Indians. This did shake me thoroughly though, and I could not bring myself to go back to the church for a long time. I truly hope I, or anyone else for that matter, are never placed in a similar situation ever again.